Ray Ahipeni Mercer has a jar of water at his home that is 24 years old, and it is crystal clear.
I've got it in the fridge. It looks like a glass of water, hasn't got a single bug growing in it, not discoloured, nothing.
What has that got to do with the 70 million litres of raw sewage pouring into Wellington's south coast every day? Well, I'll explain, and also stay tuned to hear why he's so furious.
This is catastrophic. In addition to the health matters, it's catastrophic for the marine environment. We have spent decades here in our community building up the little blue penguin population. They will be swimming through a sea of shit.
I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail.
Been doing some maintenance work on parts of the plant, and last night during that heavy rain, wastewater backed up from our outfall pipeline, got into our work site, and then completely flooded the lower floors of our Moa Point building. So we've had to shut down the plant completely, which means that at the moment untreated wastewater is going out the short outfall into Tarakina Bay.
That was last Wednesday when Wellington water boss Pat Doherty broke the news. And the bad news just kept rolling out about Moa Point.
Untreated wastewater still coming onto the beach.
So you telling me that it's likely that Wellingtonians will have to stay out of the water on the south coast for months?
Yes, I do.
For months, that they cannot go back in the water?
Correct. In the areas where we're showing it's not safe to go, I wouldn't go.
This is just a catastrophic disaster for Wellington. The sewage plant in this day and age should not suffer the kind of failure that this one did, and we're now spewing untreated sewage into the south coast of Wellington.
It gets worse the longer it's there, and it's apparently going to get smellier as well.
Journalist Tom Hunt from The Post is well aware of Wellington's wastewater woes.
You know, I live not far from the tip, and it was a still night last night, and I could pick up a faint smell.
So they're dumping some of the material at the dump?
Yeah. So they basically got these tanker trucks that Wellington's quite familiar with, because back in about COVID time, there was another pipe failure that usually takes the wastewater to the tip, and they're called the turd taxis. And they basically just back and forth ferrying all the, in this case, all the stuff out of this Olympic-sized swimming pool room and just clearing that out and taking it to the tip.
Can we just go back to that last Wednesday? So was it like sewage, raw sewage, going up into the air? Was it like an explosion?
Yeah, it sounded pretty dramatic. So it was raw sewage mixed with a lot of storm water because it was all the rain, but still raw sewage in there. In the Moa Point plant, which is down by the end of the Wellington Airport runway, there's apparently a room down the bottom that's filled with all sorts of equipment, the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That was 3 metres deep in sewage and other stuff. All the electrics, all that kind of blew, and all the equipment is, if not destroyed, seriously damaged, because electrics aren't meant to mix with water, and it's a huge amount of stuff in there.
By my calculation, if 70 million litres of untreated sewage is pouring into the south coast every day, every 24 hours, by now it'll be 630 million, possibly more.
Oh God, that's a depressing stat. I'm guessing you're right. And plus, there's obviously a lot more when it was just pissing down with rain last Wednesday morning. But of course, it was more diluted with all the storm water as well.
And what is happening now? Have you been there to see what's going on, what it looks like?
No, I haven't been inside. I think you'd have to have hazmat suits to go inside right now. But they're clearing out the gunk. I think it's 90 or 95% done yesterday, and that's kind of a race against the clock, because the longer it sits there, the more putrid it kind of gets, really, and it becomes toxic at a certain point. And so they're trying to get that cleaned first, and then I guess it'll be just trying to see what equipment can be saved. And in the immediate aftermath, we had just raw sewage going 5 metres off the coast, and that lasted a few days. And then over the weekend, they managed to get wastewater going down the longer 1.8 kilometre pipe, but that's still untreated sewage going down there, whereas it used to be treated. So, for the foreseeable future, we have effectively raw sewage being pumped off the south coast, very near a marine sanctuary, not far from a penguin nesting area. It's not the ideal place to have this kind of stuff.
And I believe the actual work itself is incredibly dangerous because of what the material that they're dealing with.
And I think it gets more dangerous the longer it sits there. The bacteria grow and it gets worse and worse.
What's the feeling in Wellington, particularly people who use those South Coast beaches and live there?
I think it's just utter frustration, really. For those who have lived in Wellington since all my life, pretty much. Back in the 80s, the whole South Coast, especially around Moa Point, was a real no-go area because we had all the sewage would just go out there, and you'd hear these horror stories from surfers, particularly at Lyell Bay, with some pretty horrible things kind of found in the water. I remember one telling me about it kind of coming up from a wave with a tampon stuck to his surfboard. So it was really grim. So it kind of really feels like back to the 1980s of a very different time where the South Coast was not a desirable place to be, and just to be back at that for a mystery reason, we still don't know what caused it. I think it's just frustration.
I've just come down to grieve and to mourn, really.
We come here all the time. I caught up with some surfers earlier this morning. This is just devastating.
Why do we keep doing this? Why don't we have a plan for our infrastructure that can cope?
You've reported on these scathing reports that have flagged up repeatedly operational and management failures.
It was actually a colleague of mine, Nicholas Boyack, who passed away last year, who's doing some really good reporting on this and attending all the Wellington water meetings and all that kind of stuff. But there has been a long history of non-compliance and real issues raised with the running of Wellington's 4 waste management plants, of which, of course, Moa Point is the biggest. But it's kind of with Wellington pipes generally, you kind of aren't surprised anymore when these kind of things happen. But this one and the scale of it is obviously much more catastrophic than I think we've had in the past.
And I see that you reported a few days ago that Veolia had been issued 10 warnings, infringement and abatement notices. And in fact, there's already been an inquiry. In 2022, there was an inquiry into multiple failures by Veolia. So what is this new inquiry going to say, and what can they do about it?
This is exactly it. We can all do all these inquiries. At the end of the day, if Wellington Water is found to be at fault, which is the one that employs Veolia to do the work, pitching about $17 million a year, if Wellington Water is found to be at fault, they will cease to exist in June. Veolia is taking over, and the contract will roll over to the new entity. But what is the point of an inquiry? But what's the option otherwise, really? We have to find out what went wrong, and hopefully a full ministerial inquiry which has the ability to compel people to give evidence.
Let's find out what the mechanical fault was that caused the problem. Then there's the process issues. So how were things set up? Who knew what when? What was the governance like? Was it adequate? What information was shared? What information was overlooked? All those sorts of things.
Might find where the fault lies, and I strongly suspect we'll find it lies in years of underinvestment in councils, not investing enough in it because it's boring stuff to invest in, but also not asking the questions of Wellington Water and Veolia, like, why are you regularly non-compliant and why have you got all these issues?
I find it interesting that after that 2022 inquiry, the reviewers concluded that terminating the Veolia contract and finding a replacement would take too long.
It's too expensive.
Too expensive, and no guarantee it would run any better than the current contract, which is, it's kind of depressing, isn't it?
First of all, we don't know for a fact it was Veolia. We don't know whose fault it is right now, but we do know it's a long history of non-compliance. But yeah, it just seems like it got put in a too hard basket back in 2022. And, at the end of the day, we still don't actually know what caused this last week. Since January 2024, that Moa Point plant has been non-compliant every month apart from 2. There's been
What does that mean, Tom? What does it mean?
It means things like, so you can fail on things like odour problems or all different things that you can be failed on, but it just basically means it's not living up to its resource consent conditions. It's just every month, bar 2, being non-compliant. So there's a whole list of things over a long time that have been pointing to quite serious issues.
More than 40 years ago, Moa Point was a battleground for residents and politicians. One of those leading the charge was Ray Ahipeni Mercer, who later became a Wellington City councillor. When he moved to Breaker Bay in the early 80s, he had no idea that there had been 100 years of untreated sewage around the corner at Moa Point.
So there was no treatment at all, no sieving, nothing. So the beaches were littered with condoms, Tampax, wet wipes, underwear, necklaces from people spewing in the toilets. I'm just giving you a rough, quick picture. So I didn't know. So within a few months of coming here, I organised with local neighbours to let's have a talk about this. And to cut a long story short, we then formally, within months, launched the Wellington Clean Water Campaign, which I co-led. We, for the next 3 years, 84 to 87, we held meetings starting in the eastern suburbs right through Wellington to alert people to what we intended, what we were about. Secondly, for their support, and thirdly, to remind them that the council had no intention of treating sewage. And we're building up massive momentum. The mayor and councillors at the time said, no, dilution is the solution. That was their mantra. We said, no, it's not. And it got to the elections. We had them dumped from office. New mayor came in, new council. And so we worked with them from 87 to 98, so another 11 years.
So it's a good treatment plant. It's a good facility.
Let me just pause you, and just excuse me interrupting. When that plant was opened, and at the time it was established, Moa Point has the highest level of treatment in the Southern Hemisphere, not just Wellington, not just New Zealand, in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, Australia may have got round to it now, but at the time, that's why what comes out with everything working looks like a glass of water out of your tap. But when I say Moa Point is the best, I want to be clear. I'm talking about the level of treatment is the best. But that comes back to the plant operators have to then deliver on the highest level of treatment. I've got here in a clear container, I've got treated effluent from Moa Point given to me 24 years ago by the plant operators at the time. I've got it in the fridge. It looks like a glass of water, hasn't got a single bug growing in it, not discoloured, nothing. The level of treatment when everything's working is fantastic. But it's what lies in front of the treatment, the delivery system, the problems. How has it been? Who's giving the oversight? Who's advising the council? That's where the neglect has arisen. The interface between the plant, Wellington Water and the council.
Experts say the infection risks from both the short and long sewage outfalls will persist for several weeks, and people should stay off Wellington's south coast beaches. They're also warned not to eat kaimoana from the area and to avoid contact with sea spray. Now there are fears more wet weather this weekend could make things worse. Ray says that's not all.
In addition to the health matters, it's catastrophic for the marine environment. We have spent decades here in our community building up the little blue penguin population to have safe places for the nesting and to be in a healthy environment. This is the worst time of the year for the birds because they're coming into molt, so they will be swimming through a sea of shit.
And Ray, from a kind of a Māori cultural perspective, What's your thinking there?
So toilet water is now brushing up against historic sites at Tarakena Bay. I mean, one of the reasons this campaign back in the 80s was successful, we married Māori concerns and Pākehā concerns together, and that's why we won that campaign. If it had only been a Māori issue, wouldn't have got that level of treatment. If it had only been Pākehā, wouldn't have got it. It was the first major time that a combination of both our cultural backdrops enabled a broad cross-section of people from the city to say, yep, we can go with both those things.
And when you say that now dirty water is washing up on taonga...
Okay, there's a bay here called Tarakena, which is near the outfall. And that is a famous waka landing beach. in our history, and I'm from the iwi that settled here, Naitara. And it's also, there's a number of past sites around here that are in the bay and surrounding areas. So we've got historic sites awash with the detritus of people's toilets.
You sound very angry.
Oh, I'm very angry because all this work we did, it's not in vain, however, because Wellingtonians have responded magnificently in the media when you go out for a walk or this and that. And I'm sitting here in my house looking at this most beautiful day in Breaker Bay in the harbour. I'm looking at the water about 50 metres away. It's beautiful. And yet underneath it is this darkness. There is not a person walking a dog, having a walk, swimming, surfing, nothing.
So after more than a week, the cause of the massive failure at Moore Point is still a mystery. Here's Tom Hunt again.
This is what stuns me, because a long outfall pipe, I've become an expert on sewage infrastructure recently, the pipe it all goes out, supposedly treated, is 1.8 kilometres long. They can only get divers to the either end of it, and they can only get cameras in 300 metres either way. So you've got 1.2 kilometres of pipe deep down in the Cook Strait there that they haven't been able to get into, and something presumably happened in that pipe for all this wastewater to suddenly, early on Wednesday morning, to go in reverse. It'd be like turning the kind of Waikato River around, but we don't know why it happened.
So are you telling me they can't see all the way through that pipe?
No, 1,200 metres they haven't been able to get in and see. They know water is getting through because they're pumping out sewage through the pipe now. So they know some of it can get through, but the big telling thing is when there's a huge next big downpour, what happens then is this issue that, recalls this kind of reversal issue. Does that happen again? I mean, we haven't been able to get answers to that, and to be frank, quite a few other questions.
What do you make of the way this is all being communicated? I feel like the chief executive of Wellington Water, Pat Doherty, has been very open. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah, and it appears he's been punished for it because Andrew Little, the Wellington mayor, told him he can no longer speak to media.
On Monday, Pat Doherty fronted on RNZ's Morning Report, saying underinvestment in the plant is one area that needs to be investigated.
And the way we've managed the plant, that needs to be looked at as well. I worry that there may have been some early warning signs that there were troubles with the discharge, and we missed those. But everything needs to be on the table.
When was that?
Over the last 3 or 4 months, I think there's been a couple of incidents that I suspect may have been early warning signs that we missed.
And who was responsible for missing those?
At that crucial point, the line cuts out. Doherty comes back on air a few minutes later, but doesn't really answer the question about responsibility. Then this.
Shortly after that, Wellington Water cancelled an interview I had scheduled with him, and Andrew Little did it instead, and it was actually the mayor who's actually told him he can't speak publicly because speculation is not helpful.
He's saying too much, Tom.
He's saying too much, and I don't know, is he, I mean, if he's wrong, if that's fair enough, but Pat, since coming to Wellington Water, has been very transparent and open with people. He's the one who's really been raising the alarm bells with council saying, we're at crisis level. It's going to be a decade to get things as good as we are now, even if you invest, in all the money we need in water. He's been very open and had some serious scrutiny on him and Wellington Water in that time. So it's a strange move, I think, to muzzle him when he's actually inherited a bit of a hospital path taking over Wellington Water, and I'm sure he's misstep, but he's actually been quite transparent. So I don't know why shut him down. Hopefully it's not forever.
The next day, Wellington Mayor Andrew Little fronted.
Now, have you stopped Wellington Water from speaking to the media? The Post says Mr Doherty had to pull out from an interview. They've described it as being muzzled.
Look, what I spoke to Wellington Water about yesterday was just to make, now that we're in the next sort of phase of the response to the plant failure, is just getting good communications, accurate communications, the communications, particularly the stuff about public health, which is not the responsibility of Wellington Water, is managed consistently and well, and we're getting good information out on a timely basis.
On this one, I think Wellington City Council, as the owner of the asset, good on them, they are front-footed. Andrew has been, in fairness, apart from shutting down Pat, very open and telling people what he can. But, as I say, we still don't know what caused it, and we don't know how much it's going to cost to fix or how much is covered by insurance. We don't know all sorts of things. We don't know, like, if that pipe was ever inspected or what that showed. There's all sorts of questions that Pat Doherty should be answering and now can't.
Will he have a role in the new operation?
No, he was very explicit about it. He took this job at Wellington Water to get it through this period, and he's definitely not going to join Te Aki Wai.
So what now? What are you waiting to hear? We want to know about the inquiry, who's going to lead it,
and also how timely it's going to be, because there's been a lot of people saying, let's get everything fixed and going first, and then we'll worry about pointing fingers. But when I was talking to Andrew Little yesterday, he said, no, the inquiry is going to start quite soon. So we've got some results in time for June when Te Aki Wai takes over, and we can look at who's actually running these plants and stuff like that if they haven't been run properly. But I guess on a practical level, what's been happening now is just try and get that plant up and running, because it will probably be months before it really is up and running again. So that means sewage going off the south coast all summer and into autumn, it sounds like.
And that means no swimming, no real use of those beaches at all.
Well, yeah, I think once they've got the long outfall going, and so it's not going to the short pipe, I think, the time will come where we can actually go back to beaches, but I think getting into the water is going to be longer by the sounds of things. But I suspect also that, I was talking before about the 1980s, early 90s in Wellington, people did still swim in the water, and I think people would start to get a bit sick of not being able to use it. And once things aren't smelling, looking better, I think there's going to be people taking that risk.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thanks to Ray Ahipeni Mercer and Tom Hunt. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and Shalise Tansey and engineered by Ben Pearce. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Mā te wā.